and yoginis. Nick here again. So I want to go over downward dog. And there's probably just about as many ways to do downward dog as there are styles of yoga. And so if you're not a student of mine, you may hear different directions in your class for how to do downward dog. Some people really focus on the hands, some people really focus on the back, some people try to focus on getting the legs straight and don't really think about the back that much. Each style is different. Being that I have come from a very tight body, and I'm not naturally flexible, I've always practiced downward dog with a focus on the back of my body and then the legs as an afterthought. And I think that's the way that most people probably need to practice it, because there's lots of postures to open up the hamstrings and the calves, but there's not a lot of postures that really help us to extend and open the muscles of the back. So in my classes, I use downward dog as a back-focused posture, not a leg-focused posture. And once you have the back aligned and comfortable, then you can start to straighten the legs. But we don't want to start to bring the legs straight and the heels down at the expense of losing that back. So we'll go over the foundation of this posture, and we'll do this with a bent leg variety so that you can really get in touch with the back. So starting on your hands and knees. You want to first spread your fingers and bring your hands so that they're as wide as the outer edge of your shoulder. And then bring your hands one of your hand lengths ahead of you. So to give your back a lot of room to stretch out here, don't start with the hands right under the shoulders. Bring them ahead. Spread your fingers wide apart so that your hands are like firm anchors. Then you're going to push the mounds of your fingers right here where your finger plugs into your hand into the floor. Keeping that action, you're going to gently claw your fingertips in. But don't claw the fingertips in so much that the mounds lift. So what this looks like, you can see my hand without being on the mat. So your hands in downward dog, if you were to look at them closely, so this would be your hand on the mat. You want to push, again I was talking about the mounds of the fingers into the floor, and then the mound of the thumb as well. And then keeping that, mounds pushing in, you gently claw the fingertips in. So I don't know if that helps to give you a better visual. But you're not going to claw the fingertips in so much that the mounds here start to lift off the mat. So you want to find that in-between point so that the hands are really active and the underneath of the forearms starts to engage or fire in downward dog on the floor. And if you're doing that correctly, not only will you feel the muscles in your hands really working, but you should feel the muscles underneath your forearms start to engage. And that's a good thing, because that will take the pressure and the weight out of your wrists in this pose. So we want to use the muscles of the hands and the muscles of the lower arms so that we're not just hanging in our wrists in downward dog and causing wrist stress. So once we have that down, downward dog, hands. And I always say when you're in downward dog, once you've mastered the hands, you've mastered the dog. So the hands are our foundation here. Very, very important. Much more important than what the legs and feet are doing. Once you have this action here in the hands, you're going to draw your tailbone into a little scoop position, just like we do in purring cat. Then you're going to curl your toes under and lift your hips up, but keep your knees bent so that you get a nice stretch through your back. So from here, I want you to bring your weight forward a little bit and really focus on squeezing the shoulder blades towards each other so that the heart is melting. Then you're going to relax your head a bit and bring yourself back. Keeping the knees bent, you're going to shoot your tailbone up, spread your sitting bones apart, and feel this big stretch in the back. To come out of this, you bring your knees down and take a rest. Lean forward here. Dog from the side so that you can see the alignment of my back. I'll show you what we want to see and what tends to happen, what we don't want to see when we focus on straightening the legs when we're not ready for it yet in the back and the hamstrings. So coming into downward dog the same way, from hands and knees, bringing your hands, one of your hand lengths forward, rooting the mounds of your fingers into the earth again, clawing And then drawing your shoulder blades together, letting your head release back. Notice that I'm keeping my knees soft here so that I can really flick my sitting bones up and melt my heart so that the back is getting a nice big stretch. If I were to focus on bringing the heels down and the legs straight, watch what happens to my back. So if I think that I want to start to bring the heels down, I'm starting to lose the curve in my lower back, and if you were tightening me even in the back, it would start to look like this, the downward dog. The upper back would be rounding, the chest would be not opening up, and you'd have a lot of weight in your hands and in your wrists, and it would be very uncomfortable on the upper half. So that's why I recommend, if you're new to yoga or if you're tight in the back, to bend your knees so that you can lift the sitting bones, get this nice big stretch through your back body. Resting, again, and forward hero. So gradually, as your back opens up in downward dog to the point where you no longer feel a stretch up into the back, then you can slowly start to pedal the feet and work the legs towards straight and still keeping the integrity of the spine in downward dog. So I know when I first started doing yoga, I hated downward dog. And I would always hear these very flexible yoga teachers say, come down and rest in downward dog. And I would think, this is not restful, this is stressful. My arms are shaking, all the weight's in my wrists, my back is rounding, and my back is tight, and my legs are tight. I promise you that if you practice downward dog, eventually, breath by breath, inch by inch, it will open in your back to the point where, yes, you will feel the arms working and extending, but you will feel a relative comfort in the pose, sort of like a big sigh. You can feel the back opening. And so there was a day where I did downward dog and I got into it and extended and felt my back open and big sigh. But that may take practice, and it does take opening up the back and opening up the legs for that to happen. So downward facing dog, that's modified for beginners or for inflexible bodies. So downward facing dog. Adho Mukha Svasana. I hope that's helpful. Practice downward dog every day, even if you don't like it, especially if you don't like it. Thank you. Namaste.